Jesus loves me, he will stay close beside me all the way. He's prepared a home for me, and someday his face I'll see. Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. The Bible tells me so.
Well, good morning, children. Man, Felix, you look all covered with bling bling today. I guess, children, it's up to us again to try and figure out who you are. Isn't that true, Felix? Well, just looking at you, I would think that you are not Joseph. Are you Joseph? You are very quiet. You're not giving us any clues. Okay, again, children, as normal, the clues are going to come out in the story. Is that correct? Okay, so I guess I can't call you Joseph, and I can't call you, I don't know what to call you, children. Do you know who he is? Well, I guess we'll just have to wait for the story. And because the story is so long today, Felix, I think we're just going to sing a song and get straight into the story today, because it's a long story. And children, don't forget again, important thing, Felix, is that the children need to get their Bibles, because we are going to learn something about you today that is so important. And it's interesting, Felix, this is a serial story, but this is the second last story. Children, tomorrow is going to be the last of the serial stories, Felix, and you can't miss that one. So let's sing This Little Light of Mine, because, I mean, if I look at you and I'm trying to learn something, one thing that we did learn about Joseph, Felix, was that no matter where he was, he let his little light shine. Even when he was in Potiphar's house, and then when he was in prison, and then finally, I don't know where he's going to be today, but he always lets his light shine for Jesus. Okay, children, will you let your lights shine for Jesus? Felix, will you? Okay, well, let's sing This Little Light of Mine. Okay, children, are you ready? This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Won't let Satan blow it out, I'm gonna let it shine. Won't let Satan blow it out, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Well, Felix, I'm going to let my light shine all around the neighborhood, and I'm not going to let the devil blow it out. Well, children, let's get into our story today, because remember I said to you yesterday that today somebody else has a dream, and maybe you're that person, Felix. So let's find out, children. I wonder if that is who he is. He looks so interesting. He's got a ring on. He's got a gold coin. You even got earrings on. I mean, I guess he really looks like an Egyptian today. So maybe you're Pharaoh. Are you Pharaoh? Oh, he's just not giving us any clues, children. So we'll just have to wait for the story. Is that correct, Felix? Okay, well, let's get into the story. The story today, children, starts off in Genesis chapter 41. Okay, now remember 38 is when we started, and then we got to 40, and then we got to 41 today. And the story that starts off in chapter 41 starts off with Pharaoh. Are you Pharaoh? Still not telling us. Okay. Well, it starts with Pharaoh, and Pharaoh is the most important person in Egypt, and he went to sleep. And I'm watching to see if you're going to sleep. No, he's not sleeping. So anyway, Pharaoh went to sleep, and Pharaoh had a dream. And in his dream, he dreamt he was standing next to the great river Nile. And he was looking out over his kingdom, and all of a sudden he noticed some cows, and there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 of them, and they were fat, and they looked so healthy, and they came and they were eating the grass around him, and he was looking and saying, wow, this is so interesting, look how fat these cows are. And while he was still looking at the cows, Felix, the next thing that happens, children, is that he sees coming out of the water, out of the river, he sees 7 thin skeleton, almost like cows. And he watched them, and he was actually shocked by them, and all of a sudden they came right up to the fat cows, and then they ate all the fat cows. And Pharaoh was looking to think at least they're now going to get fat, but they were still as thin and as skeleton-like and as ugly as ever. And then he woke up. And when he woke up, he was thinking to himself, oh, that was a strange dream. Don't you think that was a strange dream, Felix? Anyway, so while he's still thinking about it, he decides, oh, well, I'm going to go back to sleep again. And he falls asleep. And while he's sleeping, this time he has another strange dream. And in this dream, children, he dreams that there is a sheaf, again, a stalk. And out of the stalk, there are 7 beautiful fat pieces of grain, and they look so juicy. And Pharaoh's looking and saying, wow, the grain's really going to give us a good harvest this year. And he's so intrigued by it. And the next thing he notices a thin little stalk coming up, and it has thin little grains on it. And he looks at this and he thinks, whoa, that's really bad looking grain there. And he notices how that the east wind, and whenever the east wind blew, Felix, what actually happened then is that it was actually bad news for Egypt. And he looked, and as the east wind blew, he noticed how that the 7 thin little sheaves went over and ate the other grain and ate the fat grain. And when he looked at the thin grains, he noticed they still were thin and ugly. And then he woke up, and when he woke up, he was really worried. And so in the morning, he called all his wise men, and he called his magicians. In those days, he went to the most important people that were supposed to be clever and that's supposed to know everything. And he said to them, I had a dream, and I had 2 dreams. And he told them the dream, but none of them could understand or even interpret the dream. And they said, oh, we don't know what we're going to do. And Pharaoh was worried because he knew the dream was important. And guess what, Felix? All of a sudden, you remember the cupbearer? The cupbearer who Joseph helped and told him you're going to be reinstated. You remember that cupbearer? Well, that cupbearer also says, oh, I've done such an evil thing. I forgot to tell you. Oh, Pharaoh, I forgot to tell you. But there's a young Hebrew boy. Remember that time, Pharaoh, when you were angry with us and you threw me, the cupbearer, and the baker, you remember you threw us into your prison, and while we were in your prison, we met a young Hebrew boy. And the interesting thing is that the cupbearer, me, and the baker, we both had dreams, and this Hebrew boy told us what the dreams were, and he gave us the interpretation, and it happened exactly as he said. And so when Pharaoh heard this, children, he said, fetch that Hebrew boy. And instead of bringing, Joseph looking so dirty and unshaven, they quickly let him clean up because he's coming into the presence of Pharaoh, the most important person in the whole land. And they clean him up and they shave him and they dress him nicely. And, oh, well, you can't be him because you're looking too smart. So anyway, Joseph came to Pharaoh's presence, and Pharaoh says, I believe that you can interpret dreams. And Joseph says, no, I can't interpret dreams, but God, our God, the one that we serve, he can interpret dreams. So anyway, so Pharaoh says, okay, well, I'm going to tell you the dreams. And he goes on to tell him the dreams that he saw, how that he was standing at the river Nile, and the 7 fat cows came out, and then the 7 thin, ugly ones, and they ate up the fat ones, and yet they still stayed thin. He says, and then after this, I had a dream about this one stalk. It was full of 7 strong grains, and then thin little one grew up and ate up all the 7 strong ones, and I woke up and I was so worried. And Joseph says, you know, I think I need to ask God to give me that. And he prays. He says, God, you are the one that knows all dreams, and like you did with me when it came to the cupbearer and the baker, you gave me wisdom. Please help me to know what Pharaoh wants. And then God tells him. And then he turns to Pharaoh and he says, Pharaoh, God has decided, the God who knows everything has decided to reveal to you, O Pharaoh, what he is going to do. Now listen to that, Felix. Joseph is telling Pharaoh that God is about to do something. But he wants to warn Pharaoh first. And he says, Pharaoh, this is what the visions mean. And the important thing that you need to understand is both of them mean the same thing. The fat cows and the fat grain mean the same thing, and the thin cows and the thin grain mean the same thing. Do you understand that, Pharaoh? And Pharaoh said, yes, I understand. He says, okay. The 7 fat cows and the 7 fat pieces of grain means that God is going to allow 7 years of abundance to come to the land of Egypt. There is going to be even maybe bumper crops. You know what bumper crops are, Felix? Well, it's where sometimes you have a harvest and then you have a second harvest on top of that because the land is so fruitful. And he says there's going to be bumper crops, there's going to be abundance of grain, abundance of food throughout Egypt. And he says that is what it is. But then he says, I want to warn you, O king. He says, because the second part of the vision is that the 7 thin cows that ate the fat cows mean, and the 7 thin grains that ate the fat grains mean that 7 years are going to come of extreme famine on the land of Egypt. And when that happens, the east wind is going to blow and there is going to be nothing. And as you saw in your dream, it's going to be worse than the 7 years of lean. It's going to be absolutely devastating to the land of Egypt. Do you understand that, O king? And the king says, yes. Pharaoh. And Pharaoh says, yes, I understand. And then Joseph says, and my advice, king, is that because God has allowed you to see this in advance, you need to do something about this. You need to put somebody in charge who is going to look after the affairs of Egypt and prepare during the 7 years, get harvest, get big silos built, put the wheat into there, not weeds, put the wheat into there and get all the abundance of food and make sure that you really harvest like anything, because 7 bad years are coming. You need to really get somebody who knows what he's talking about. And Pharaoh turned to all the people. He says, well, do you know of anybody like this young man Joseph? You know, he has the Spirit of God living in him. And if God has revealed this to him, he's the person we need to put in charge. And you know what Pharaoh did? He took a signet ring. Oh, is that what this is, Felix? Oh, is that a signet ring? Oh, and the next thing that Pharaoh did is he put a gold chain around his neck. So I know who you are. Children, do you know who Felix is now? Can you guess? Oh, well, I realize now that you are not Pharaoh, but that you are really Joseph. Are you Joseph? Wow, Felix, this is incredible. You know, so Joseph had a gold chain around his neck and he had a ring on his finger, and that ring was like a stamp. Whenever he put his stamp on there, everybody had to listen. And Pharaoh actually said to Joseph, out of all the people in Egypt, you are second in command to me. I'm the only one that is above you, but everybody else, whenever you speak, they will do what you say. Can you imagine that, Felix? And Joseph was elevated. And you know how old Joseph was when Pharaoh made him in charge of everything? Do you know how old he was? Okay, well, let me tell you. You know, the Bible says to me that Joseph was 30 years old. Now, children, can you remember, Felix, can you remember how old Joseph was when he went and he had that dream about all the stars and the sun and the moon and all the wheat, you know, that was bound down? Do you remember? How old was he again? Can you remember, Felix? Can you remember? Okay, well, children, you know, Felix, must I whisper it in your ear, or must I tell everybody? Must I tell everybody? Okay, well, children, remember he was 17 years old. And now he is 30 years old. Now, if you subtract 17 from 30, how long was he in Egypt already as a slave and in the prison? How long was he? For 17 from 30, Felix, how much is that? Oh, yes, children, 13 years. 13 years he was a prisoner. Can you imagine that? Oh, it must have really been terrible. And, you know, yet when we read it, it just seems like it happened so quickly. But 13 years went past. And anyway, the interesting thing is beautiful things happen. Pharaoh actually changes Joseph's name and gives him a name. And children, I really struggle to say this name. Zephaniah. Really a difficult name. My tongue gets all tied out. I wonder what it means. I think I'm going to go and find out what it means. And he allowed him to marry Asenath, who was the daughter of Potiphar. Not Potiphar, the one that he worked for, but this Potiphar, he was actually the priest of On, and a very important person. And so Asenath was his wife. And you know, for 7 years, he went and he got bumper crops in and he built big silos. You know what silos are? Well, silos is where they put the seed in and they filled up and they built more silos. And for 7 years, there was just lots and lots and lots of grain and harvest coming in. And in every city, major city, Joseph built these massive silos and filled them up with grain. The grain was so much that in the end, they didn't even try and keep record anymore. It was more than the grains of sand on the seashore. That's how much there was. And exactly as Joseph said to Pharaoh, the next thing that happened is that 7 lean years come. Now, the interesting thing is in the story, we also told that Joseph has 2 sons. And the interesting one is that he calls the first one Manasseh. Now, he calls his firstborn Manasseh. Remember, it was the first child that he had there. And he says the reason why he called his son Manasseh was, it is because God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household. Wow. You know, it means that Joseph, by this time, he couldn't even remember what his father looked like and what his mother looked like and his brothers. He had forgotten. You know, and he had such a hard time in Egypt. And so that was a reminder. Every time he called him his son, Manasseh, come here, he would say, oh, I've forgotten my family. But then the next time he has another son, and this son he calls Ephraim. Now that is interesting, because he says, it is because God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering. Wow, isn't that true? He's got a signet ring, a gold chain, and he's second in charge, and he does this wonderful work for Pharaoh. And he's really a very powerful man. And so it's true, the name that he gave to his second son, which was so important to him, Ephraim, meant that God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering. Now the interesting thing, as I told you, Felix, the 7 lean years come to an end. The 7 fat years come to an end, and 7 lean years come. And you know what the interesting thing is? Finally, all the grains that had been stored out all over Egypt started to run out, and people were getting very hungry. Now, you know who else was getting hungry? Do you know, Felix? Well, okay, you want me to tell you? I think, children, tomorrow I'm going to tell you who else was getting hungry. So, children, I hope you had a lovely time with us today. And Felix, well, Joseph, in actual fact, with your signet ring, gold chain, you're such an important person. Well, tomorrow we're going to find out more about you. And you've got 2 sons. That's interesting. 2 sons, don't forget their names. Now, children, tomorrow we are going to carry on with the story. Have a lovely day. And remember, be as faithful as Joseph was. Felix, will you do that? Remember, he loved God and he loved his family. You must love God and love your family too. Will you do that? Okay, well, children, bye. See you tomorrow. Have a lovely day.